Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Story Sleeper. Here on this channel I share classic stories and fairy tales to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we start, I would like to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, get comfortable and relax. The desert always had a hush to it, especially at night, long after the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving trails of orange and deep violet behind. A silence would settle over the landscape like a soft blanket. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt empty or void. It was more like the earth was exhaling slowly, stretching out beneath the stars. Dale Marlin had worked the graveyard shift at the Sand Ridge weather station for over a decade. He didn't mind the hours. In fact, he preferred them. The station sat alone, miles away from the nearest town, tucked between faded hills and endless salt brush. It was just Dale, the monitors, the whispering wind, and the sky. Each night followed the same rhythm. Coffee brewed slowly. The hum of outdated computers filled the control room. Satellite feeds streamed silently across the dusty screens, and above it all, always, was the desert sky, wide and endless, a map of stars that moved with comforting precision, wheeling overhead from dusk to dawn. Dale knew the constellations like old friends. Orion would rise just after 10 in the colder months, its belt glittering like pinned gemstones. The Pleiades hovered like a delicate cluster in the northeast. The North Star held steady, ever loyal. He'd often step outside and breathe in the cool air, letting the sharp, quiet beauty of it all soothe whatever weight the day had left behind. But on one particular night, a night that began like all the others, something felt different. He arrived just before 9, as usual, his thermos of coffee tucked under one arm and a worn paperback stuffed in his jacket pocket. The building was dark, except for the usual porch light flickering over the steel door. Inside, it smelled like old paper and electrical warmth. Familiar, ordinary. He settled into the chair with a creak, tapped the side of the monitor like he always did, and began the standard checks. Temperatures were steady. Wind speeds were low. Radar images showed clear skies across the region. But then, as he glanced at the time, 9:42 p.m., something tugged gently at the edge of his attention. He frowned, glanced up at the narrow strip of night visible through the station's small ceiling window. He expected to see the usual drift of stars, a slow, graceful crawl to the west. But the stars looked still, suspended, as if someone had taken a photograph and pasted it across the sky. He blinked and looked again. No shift, no drift. He turned to the digital sky map. The time-stamped data showed the stars' expected positions at that hour. Yet when he compared it to what he saw through the window, they didn't align. Strange, he thought. Maybe an illusion. Maybe fatigue. He stood, stepped outside. The air met him cool and dry, tinged with sage and dust. Above him, the sky stretched endless, but it felt closer somehow, pressed down, watching. He traced Orion's belt with his eyes, then the curve of Cassiopeia, the bright pulse of Sirius. All exactly where they should be, but frozen. Their positions hadn't changed since he arrived. Stars moved, always. Even if you stared at them for just 15 minutes, you could see the shift if you knew where to look. But now, nearly an hour had passed, and Dale saw no movement at all. He reached for his phone, checking the time again. 10:11 p.m. He refreshed the app. Still no movement above. He walked back inside slowly, the soles of his boots crunching softly over the gravel. The silence pressed in a little more tightly now. Inside the station, he double-checked the readings. All normal, clear skies, no anomalies. He sipped his coffee, now lukewarm. Then, a flicker on the corner monitor caught his eye. A single temperature spike, faint but perfectly circular, appeared on the regional map. A spiral, almost, like a fingerprint etched into the atmosphere. It lasted only a few seconds before vanishing. That was new. He zoomed in. Nothing. No source, no aircraft, no heat signatures nearby. The clock read 10:22. He opened the weather logs, began to type a note, just in case. Unusual stellar stillness observed. Sky above Western Ridge appears stationary. Possible visual anomaly. As he finished typing, the room's lights dimmed briefly. Not a full flicker, more like a breath being drawn. Then the radio scanner chirped. A static pulse, sharp and sudden. He leaned in, adjusting the dial. Nothing but a low hiss, like wind across gravel. He stood again, restless, returned outside. The stars remained where they were, unmoving. Peaceful. Too peaceful. And that was when he noticed it. A single point in the sky, slightly west of the ridge. That didn't twinkle like the others. It didn't pulse, didn't shift, didn't seem to belong. It looked like a star, but somehow wrong. Its glow was steady, not cold like starlight, but soft, like the light behind a closed door. And in his chest, something stirred. Not fear, not yet. Just attention, as though something had just turned toward him and began to watch. Dale remained outside longer than usual, his arms folded against the slight chill that drifted across the open desert. He kept his gaze on that single point of light, the one that didn't flicker or blink. It just hung there, unwavering, like a pin fixed into the dark fabric of the night. He told himself it was a satellite, probably one of those geostationary ones that didn't move much in the sky, but satellites didn't usually give off that warm, pulsing glow. They reflected light. They didn't emit it. And there was something about this one, something he couldn't quite name. The longer he watched it, the more it felt like it wasn't just there. It was present. He stepped back inside the weather station. The door clicked shut behind him, muffling the desert's breath. The fluorescent lights above gave a soft hum, steady and pale. He sat down in the worn swivel chair, opened his log again. 10:47 p.m. Unusual light observed. Suspended over Western Ridge. Constant glow. no visible motion, possible satellite, but behavior inconsistent. He paused, staring at what he'd just typed. It felt clinical, distant, but inside he felt anything but. Something was changing out there tonight. He leaned forward and began pulling up satellite feeds, hoping for a clearer view. The national map showed nothing unusual. No aircraft, no storm systems, no disturbances. The stars, according to every software program he had, were exactly where they should be. And yet Dale knew they weren't moving. He tapped the side of the monitor, though he knew the issue wasn't with the tech. It was the sky. The sky had stopped. And that light. He returned to the window. The light was still there, still steady. But now, was it closer? He squinted, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. Maybe the desert's endless depth was warping his perception. Maybe. He took out his phone and aimed the camera at the sky, zooming in toward the light. The moment he did, the screen glitched. Static lines danced across the image, warping the pixels into strange shapes. The camera shutter froze. Then the phone shut off completely. Dale stared at it, then tried powering it on again. Nothing. He held it in his hand for a long moment, feeling its slight warmth fade. Something in the pit of his stomach turned. He turned on the station's landline radio, the one that connected to other regional outposts. Static. No signal. Not even the low hum of a connection. Just silence. The room seemed quieter now, not in the peaceful way it usually felt, but like the quiet before a storm, thick and aware. He stepped back outside, phone still in hand. The wind had picked up slightly, curling around his ankles and whispering across the dirt. The air felt heavier somehow, and the light, it was definitely larger now. Still distant, but undeniably closer. It hovered just above the ridgeline, perfectly still, like a ship waiting offshore. He stared, unblinking. His mind quietly raced. Was it a drone? A weather balloon catching the light just right? Then the light shifted. Not moved. Not exactly. But changed. It pulsed once. A deep, slow breath of light. A soft expansion and contraction, like something alive. And for the first time in years, Dale felt something like awe ripple through his chest. A quiet, ancient kind of wonder. The kind humans feel when they sense something beyond understanding. He sat down on the station's front step, the concrete cool beneath him, and watched. The stars around the object were still frozen, as though time had folded in that one section of sky. Only the object seemed capable of movement. Another pulse. Soft. Deliberate. Then, like a curtain being drawn slowly aside, the stillness in the sky began to unravel. One by one, the stars resumed their movement, gently sliding westward once more. Orion drifted. Sirius shifted. The sky began to breathe again, but the light remained. Dale stayed there for a long time, eyes fixed on that single point. His thoughts drifted with the silence. He wondered how long it had truly been still, if anyone else had noticed, if someone or something had wanted to be seen. At 12:03 a.m., the light faded, not disappeared. It simply dimmed, like an ember sinking into ash. And then it was gone. Dale sat in the hush that followed, listening to the wind and the gentle hum of the station's roof vent turning slowly above. He stood, slowly, and walked back inside. The monitors were quiet. No alarms, no alerts. The temperature spike from earlier had vanished from the logs. He opened a fresh log entry. 12:07 a.m. Object departed. Stars resumed normal motion. No sound. No further visual disturbances. Phone remains non-functional. Will report anomaly to regional coordinator at shift end. He saved the note, then paused, and after a long hesitation, added a final line. It felt like it saw me. The next morning came slowly. Dale didn't sleep. He sat at the small kitchen table inside the weather station, nursing a cup of stale coffee, the kind that had sat too long on the burner and tasted more like old paper than warmth. The desert outside was washed in a pale golden hue, the early light painting long shadows over dry brush and rocks. Everything looked the same, and yet everything felt different. His phone still wouldn't turn on, even after a full hour plugged into the wall. He tried a backup device from the station's emergency drawer, a basic flip phone hardly ever used. It powered on, but when he stepped outside to call the regional coordinator, the call failed. No bars, no signal, just a quiet, call failed screen blinking back at him. Inside, the radio was still full of static. Every frequency, even the no AA bands, which were almost never silent. The airwaves had gone quiet. It wasn't until around 9 a.m. that a signal finally broke through. A brief stutter, like a voice underwater. Then another. Just a few words, but enough to make Dale freeze in place. Unusual interference. Unknown cause. Then silence again. The stillness returned. Dale stood at the window and looked toward the horizon, where that strange light had hovered the night before. The sky was bright and empty now. Not a cloud in sight. Just clean blue stretching out in every direction. He watched a hawk circle lazily above the hills. Somewhere, far off, a dust devil spun itself into the air and then unraveled again. He could almost believe he had imagined it all. Almost. That night, the stars moved. He made note of it, not just casually, but with something close to relief. Orion traced its slow arc across the black sky. Jupiter rose like a golden marble near the edge of the southern hills. But that didn't mean things were normal. Around 2 a.m., as he stood on the roof of the station for a better look, Dale heard something. Or rather, didn't hear something. At first, it was the wind, a dry sigh brushing through the tall scrub. Then, not wind. It was like the wind had been cut off. The world fell utterly, completely silent. Not even the soft chirp of night insects. no distant hum of desert life. It was as though the sound had been scooped out of the air. Even his own breath felt muted. Dale turned slowly, trying to understand what had changed. The world looked the same, starlit, still, vast, but the silence was wrong. Then he noticed the lights on the weather station, flickering, not going out, just stuttering, glitching almost, like old film. A moment of darkness, then back again, then flicker, flicker. He stepped down from the roof cautiously, gripping the rail as he descended the metal stairs, which creaked faintly beneath him. Inside, the monitors were acting strange. The screens showed bursts of static, blinking out every few seconds before returning. One of them, the oldest, began scrolling lines of gibberish across the weather log. Symbols, not numbers, not letters, just symbols. Like something had reached inside the machine and changed the language. He stood there, unsure of what to do, and then it all stopped. The lights steadied. The hum of the wind returned. The insects resumed their soft chorus outside. The radio clicked back on and began its usual low hiss of static and garbled chatter. It was as if nothing had happened, except that Dale had seen it, heard it, felt it. A pause in the world. He wrote down what he could in the station log, handwriting this time, not trusting the electronic systems anymore. But he didn't submit the report. Not yet. That morning, after the sun had risen and the wind carried the smell of dry sage into the air, he stood out behind the station and looked up again. He didn't see the object. Not now. But he felt something. Not fear, not quite awe. More like attention. As though somewhere beyond what the eye could see, something had taken note of him. And in the warmth of that new day, Dale whispered quietly to the sky, "I saw you too." Dale began marking the nights, not just in his logs, but in a leather-bound notebook he kept by the bunk now. He noted star movements, wind shifts, strange electrical flickers, any sound that didn't quite belong. There wasn't always something to write, but when there was, it felt significant. One evening, just after sunset, he noticed the power reading spike. A brief surge in voltage on the rooftop anemometer, even though the winds were calm. It lasted only a second or two. A similar spike came 3 days later, again just after sunset. Then again a week later. He began to wonder, was there a rhythm to this? Not a perfect pattern. More like footsteps. Distant. Unpredictable. But echoing just enough to suggest movement. At night, Dale would sit outside, wrapped in a faded army blanket, listening. Sometimes, a low hum reached him, not from the sky, not from the ground, but from within. A feeling in the chest, not the ears, like pressure just before a storm, a sound that bypassed hearing and settled into the bones. He didn't feel afraid, not exactly. There was a presence to it, Yes, a quiet tension, as though something immense was watching from far away. But it felt restrained, as if it meant no harm. One early morning, he woke before dawn, drenched in a quiet sweat. The air inside the station was unusually still. The lights hadn't flickered. No sounds. Nothing moved, except the sky. From his cot, he could see it through the narrow window, that endless desert canopy. A single star was pulsing slowly, like the heartbeat of the night. Not twinkling, pulsing. He sat up slowly, watching, and then he saw it. A shift. The stars nearby were bending, ever so slightly, like their light was passing through something invisible. A ripple, delicate and precise like heat shimmer on the horizon. And then it was gone, as though it had never been there. He walked outside barefoot, the ground cool beneath him. The desert was quiet, the wind gentle. Coyotes called far in the distance. The sky was smooth again. No pulses, no distortions. Just stars, silent and ancient. Still, he whispered again, "I saw you." A few days later, Dale received a call. It came through the emergency comm line, the one that rarely rang, and never at night. He answered with a dry voice, expecting routine check-ins. But the voice on the other end wasn't one he recognized. "Mr. Carter," the voice said, low, calm, male. "We've reviewed your recent logs." Dale froze. "I didn't submit anything," he said. There was a pause, then, "We're aware. Some systems report directly." He swallowed. "Who is this?" "Just a coordination unit," the man said. "We'd like to schedule a site inspection. Nothing formal. You won't need to leave. Just continue your work." "And if I say no?" Another pause. "We'd rather you didn't." The call ended. Dale set the receiver down slowly and looked at the blinking light on the comm panel. The call hadn't been recorded. No time code. No trace. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window, eyes scanning the dark edges of the desert. And when the stars moved again, when that ripple came, he wasn't surprised. He only nodded as if to say, "I'm still here." The next evening came with wind, a soft, whispering kind, just enough to stir the sand and make the air smell of dust and sage. Dale stood outside again, bundled in his field jacket, watching the stars blink into place like old friends taking their seats. Hours passed in silence. Then headlights approached on the long dirt road that curved in from the east, a road rarely used, even by supply trucks. Two beams in the dark, slow and steady. Dale didn't move. The vehicle came to a stop 50 feet from the station. It was a black SUV, the kind used by government surveyors. Unmarked, clean, too polished for the desert. Two men stepped out. Dark suits, no insignia. They moved like shadows, calm and careful, stepping through the dust as if they'd done this 1,000 times. "Mr. Carter?" one of them asked softly. Dale nodded. "We won't take much of your time," the man continued. "Just a few follow-ups on your equipment readings." Neither of them carried clipboards. No gear, no bags. Just suits, silence, and a tone that was too quiet to feel casual. They asked to see the logs. Dale brought them inside. They studied the screens without touching anything, occasionally exchanging glances. They asked about the sky pulses, the power flickers, the strange patterns Dale had logged by hand. He told the truth, or most of it. Finally, one of them asked, "Have you seen anything unexplainable?" Dale paused. "Nothing I'd call a threat," he said. That seemed to satisfy them. They left without warning, walking into the darkness as silently as they'd arrived, their vehicle lights off until they were far down the road. That night, the desert felt heavier. The stars looked the same, but the air had a different weight, like something old had been stirred beneath the sand. Dale turned off the lights inside the station and sat in the dark for a long time, listening. The wind had stopped. No hums, no distant sounds. And then, faintly, from somewhere in the distance, a light. Not a vehicle, not a plane. Just a soft glow rising and dipping above the ridge. Dale stepped outside, breath shallow, as the glow drifted closer. Not fast, not aggressive. Like it was watching him too, curious but cautious. It hovered for a moment, a pale, silent orb, no larger than a basketball. And then it flickered and disappeared. Gone, without a sound. Back inside, Dale wrote just one sentence in his notebook. "I don't think they're here to harm us, but I don't think they came for us either." And he slept, finally, without dreams. The following days were quiet. No more strange lights. No pulses through the radio towers. No humming in the walls. Just wind through the wires, and the low, predictable voice of the desert. A soft reminder that things always return to stillness. But Dale changed. He still ran the station, still took readings, still mailed in his reports. Yet now he moved with more silence, more attention. As if listening for something that might return, or might not. Something he could never quite name. He kept the blinds half closed during the day, letting in narrow shafts of sun, and drank his coffee slower. There was peace in the not knowing. One evening, a letter arrived. No stamp, no return address. Just his name handwritten in neat, slanted script. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. "Thank you for your cooperation. Please maintain operational silence." The data was reviewed. The event was not a threat. You may resume standard reporting. There was no signature. He folded it once, set it in a drawer, and never opened it again. One night, near the end of his shift, Dale stepped outside and looked up. The stars shimmered. No patterns, no pulses. Just the cold and distant glimmer of light scattered across infinite black. But as he stood there, something shifted. Not in the sky, but in him. He realized he wasn't waiting anymore. Whatever had passed through, whatever had watched, flickered, or hovered in silence, had moved on. It had seen him, perhaps even understood him in some small way. And now, it was done. Still, the thought comforted him that not everything in the universe needed to be solved. Some things simply passed through, like wind or starlight. He whispered aloud, not expecting an answer. "Wherever you went, I hope it's quiet." Weeks turned to months. The readings returned to normal. The station remained uneventful. Tourists came and went down the canyon roads, unaware of the flickers that once stirred above the ridge. And Dale, older now, a little slower, would sometimes look up during his final check of the night, eyes scanning that vast, dark sea. He no longer searched. He remembered. And in those moments, when the desert was silent and the sky stretched still and black above him, he could almost feel it again. That strange awareness brushing the edges of thought. Not fear, not danger. Just the soft gravity of something unknowable, watching and choosing to pass by without harm. The sky didn't move that night. And sometimes, that's the most extraordinary thing of all. John Greenwald Jr. was not born into a world of mystery and secrets. His childhood, like many others, was filled with ordinary things. School, family dinners, cartoons on Saturday mornings. But beneath that ordinary exterior lay a mind that was restless, endlessly curious, and drawn to the unexplained. Growing up in the early 1990s, John was captivated by stories that most adults dismissed as fantasy. tales of unidentified flying objects, secret government programs, and shadowy agencies whispered in the corridors of power. His fascination was not just about alien beings or flying saucers. It was about the human desire to uncover truth, especially the truths buried by those in power. At a time when the internet was barely a household tool, John discovered a way to peek behind the curtain. The Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, was a legal door that allowed citizens to request government records, a door many government offices hoped would remain unopened. John became a master of navigating its labyrinthine process. He sent his first request to the Air Force in 1996, seeking information about Project Blue Book, the now declassified investigation into UFO sightings during the Cold War. What he received back was only a fraction of what he had hoped for, but it ignited a spark. John realized that the government was not always forthcoming, and that many secrets remained locked away. Undeterred, John sent dozens of requests, some detailed, others broad, hoping to gather fragments of a larger truth. Over time, he began amassing hundreds of pages of documents, each a puzzle piece in a vast, secret picture. Realizing that these files deserved more than to gather dust in his basement, John created the Black Vault, a website designed to collect and share these documents with anyone who wanted to see them. It was a simple concept, but revolutionary in its transparency. The Black Vault quickly attracted attention. Researchers, skeptics, and believers alike pored over the files, discussing their contents in forums and chat rooms. Some documents confirmed well-known cases, others revealed new, unsettling details. But all of it painted a picture of a government deeply invested in monitoring and managing unexplained phenomena. Yet, the deeper John dug, the more resistance he met. Agencies began to deny requests, citing vague national security concerns. Files that were once accessible disappeared, and new hurdles appeared. It was as if the government had noticed his efforts and was working to close the cracks he had found. But John's resolve only hardened. The Black Vault became not just a repository of documents, but a symbol of resistance against secrecy. Its users rallied to help file FOIA requests, share leads, and spread the word. Behind the scenes, John worked tirelessly. He analyzed, cross-referenced, and annotated documents to make sense of the sprawling data. He connected with insiders, whistleblowers, and experts who provided context and validation. The vault grew, evolving from a small hobby into a vital source of information for anyone searching for answers beyond the official narratives. But with growing influence came shadows. John began to notice unusual activity. His emails were intercepted. His website faced cyber attacks, and strange figures seemed to linger on the edges of his life. The Black Vault was no longer just a website. It had become a beacon for those who dared to question, and a target for those who wanted silence. This is the story of John Greenwald Jr. and the Black Vault, a story about curiosity, courage, and the unyielding quest to bring hidden truths to light. First encounters. John's earliest FOIA requests were met with polite responses. Pages of photocopied reports arrived by mail, often yellowed and fragile. These documents spoke of radar blips, pilot sightings, and unexplained aerial phenomena that baffled military personnel. To John, these were more than mere curiosities. They were breadcrumbs leading toward a much larger mystery. One of the earliest and most iconic cases was the 1947 Roswell incident, the supposed crash of a flying saucer in New Mexico. While many believed the government had covered up the truth, John's research revealed layers of confusion, misinformation, and contradictory reports that only deepened the mystery. Over time, John discovered more obscure files, reports from remote military bases, interviews with anonymous witnesses, and notes from intelligence officers. He realized that official investigations like Project Blue Book barely scratched the surface. The documents hinted at experimental aircraft, psychological operations, and covert projects with cryptic names like Aquarius and Majestic 12. Many records were heavily redacted, with large blacked-out sections that obscured critical details. John's frustration with redactions grew, fueling his determination to keep digging. The creation of the Black Vault in 1996, with only a handful of documents to share, John launched the Black Vault. It was an act of rebellion against the culture of secrecy. The site started as a simple HTML page hosting PDFs and scans of FOIA documents. But its impact was immediate. UFO enthusiasts, journalists, and truth seekers from around the world visited to read the files firsthand. The Black Vault was one of the first places where such government documents were openly accessible to the public online. As requests multiplied, so did the archives. John began scanning documents from physical copies, digitizing hundreds of pages every week. The site expanded to include forums, news, and updates on new FOIA releases. The Black Vault quickly became a nexus point for the UFO community, bridging the gap between casual observers and serious researchers. Obstacles and opposition. Not everyone welcomed John's work. As the vault grew, government agencies became more cautious. Requests that had once been answered in weeks were suddenly delayed for months or outright denied. John began receiving cryptic warnings through back channels, unofficial messages suggesting he should stop digging. At one point, a server hosting the Black Vault was mysteriously shut down, and John faced legal threats over copyrighted documents he had posted. But these challenges only made John more resolute. He refined his methods, using legal expertise and support networks to fight denials and push for transparency. His story became one of David versus Goliath, a lone seeker battling institutional secrecy, the community and influence. The Black Vault inspired countless others to file their own FOIA requests, creating a decentralized network of researchers uncovering hidden truths. John's site became a vital resource for documentaries, books, and news reports on UFO phenomena. His interviews and presentations brought a new level of credibility to the UFO disclosure movement. For many, the Black Vault represented hope, that even in a world dominated by secrets, truth could emerge. A beacon in the darkness. As the new millennium approached, the Black Vault's reputation grew. It became a shining example of what determined citizens could achieve with persistence and technology. But lurking beneath the success was a darker reality. The more light John shone on hidden operations, the more he realized just how deep and complex the web of secrecy was. And the forces opposing him were watching. John Greenwald Jr. knew the road he had chosen was not an easy one. The deeper he ventured into the tangled web of classified documents and secret investigations, the more he realized that the Black Vault was more than a simple archive. It was a battleground between curiosity and control, between light and shadow. The documents he collected often spoke in riddles, and the silence between the lines was as telling as the words themselves. Every redaction, every missing page, every delayed FOIA response hinted at a truth too sensitive to be revealed, a truth that some would go to great lengths to protect. The first warning signs. It started with minor glitches on his website, pages failing to load, files mysteriously disappearing, strange traffic spikes at odd hours. Then came the emails, some polite inquiries, others thinly veiled threats warning him to stop digging. John shrugged off the first incidents as part of the territory, but soon the signs grew harder to ignore. Once, late at night, his phone buzzed repeatedly with a series of silent calls from an unknown number. When he answered, all he heard was static. His computer experienced unexplained crashes during critical uploads. Even his home internet would go dark for minutes at a time without explanation. John wasn't paranoid. He was cautious. The Majestic 12. Mystery. One of the most elusive subjects in John's vault was the so-called Majestic 12, an alleged top-secret committee formed in the aftermath of the Roswell crash. Officially denied by the government, documents mentioning the group were often met with blanket denials or claims of forgery. Yet, John's collection included hundreds of pages referencing Majestic 12, internal memos hinting at their existence, and testimonies from former intelligence officers who claimed to have been ordered to keep quiet. These documents suggested a coordinated effort to manage UFO information, control narratives, and suppress public knowledge. Majestic 12 was a symbol of the power behind the curtain, an unseen hand shaping what the public could know, deeper connections. As John expanded his requests, patterns began to emerge. Files from different agencies, the Air Force, CIA, NSA, occasionally referenced similar incidents but with varying details. Some mentioned black helicopters circling remote areas. Others described pilots ordered to keep silent about encounters with unknown crafts. A few even hinted at experiments with captured technology. John became obsessed with piecing together these disparate fragments into a cohesive story. Allies in the shadows. Through online forums and discreet contacts, John found others who shared his quest. Some were former military personnel, others scientists or whistleblowers willing to risk their careers. One such contact, a former Air Force intelligence analyst who preferred to remain anonymous, sent John documents detailing an encounter between a fighter pilot and an unexplainable aerial object in the 1980s. The analyst explained how many witnesses were sworn to secrecy under penalty of law, and how the government routinely monitored individuals who asked too many questions. These connections gave John more than just documents. They provided context, validation, and a network of support. The battle for disclosure Public interest in UFOs surged periodically, often fueled by leaked videos or official admissions. The Black Vault became a central repository for newly released footage, official statements, and whistleblower accounts. Yet the push for transparency was met with resistance. Classified programs were relocated or renamed. Data was encrypted or deleted. Insiders were discredited or silenced. John understood that disclosure was a double-edged sword. Governments wanted to control the narrative, releasing just enough information to quell speculation, but not enough to reveal the full picture. Personal cost. The relentless pursuit took its toll on John. Long nights spent reviewing files, constant emails, and the weight of secrecy wore on him. His family noticed the change, the stress, the obsession, the occasional paranoia. There were times he questioned if the truth was worth the personal cost. But every new document, every new lead, renewed his determination. The Black Vault. Today. Years after its creation, the Black Vault stood as a monument to transparency and the quest for truth. It hosted tens of thousands of pages of government records, from mundane reports to explosive revelations. John's work inspired journalists, authors, and filmmakers, pushing the UFO conversation into mainstream discourse. But the vault was more than a collection of files. It was a testament to the power of persistence in the face of secrecy. John Greenwald Jr. was no stranger to mystery, but some truths hid deeper than any classified file. The more he peeled back layers of government secrecy, the more complex and dangerous the maze became. It wasn't just about UFOs anymore. It was about control, manipulation, and the fragile balance between public knowledge and hidden agendas, the deep web of deception. One afternoon, while sifting through a batch of newly declassified documents, John stumbled upon references to a covert operation called Project Iceworm. Unlike other UFO cases, this one involved not aerial phenomena, but underground bases hidden beneath the Arctic ice. The documents describe tunnels and facilities allegedly constructed for secret research, some linked to alien technology, reverse engineering. Whispers of black ops teams assigned to guard these installations circulated among insiders. John's curiosity was piqued. If governments hid secrets beneath the ice, what else lurked in the shadows? The enigmatic source. Through an encrypted messaging app, John connected with an anonymous whistleblower known only as Echo. Echo claimed to have insider knowledge of classified projects, hinting at a web of cover-ups that extended beyond UFOs into weaponization and mind control experiments. Their conversations were brief but intense. Echo shared redacted files, photos, and cryptic warnings. "You're getting close, John," one message read. "They watch. They interfere. Be careful." John wrestled with trust and caution. The information was too valuable to ignore, but the risks were real. The disappearing witnesses, stories of witnesses who came forward with extraordinary claims, often ended the same way: lost jobs, threats, or vanishing without a trace. John cataloged hundreds of such cases, each one a stark reminder of the price of truth. One chilling story was that of a former Navy officer who reported seeing a craft emerge from the ocean depths near a classified base. After his testimony went public, He was reportedly silenced in a suspicious accident. These tales hardened John's resolve. The stakes were higher than he'd imagined. Technology beyond imagination. Documents hinted at recovered materials with properties that defied physics. Metals that could withstand extreme temperatures. Devices that emitted unknown energy signatures. John found references to secret labs studying these artifacts, some involving collaborations between agencies and private contractors. The research was shrouded in compartmentalization. Only a handful had full clearance. John realized the UFO phenomenon wasn't just about sightings. It was about technology, power, and control. The public's growing curiosity. As news outlets began reporting on UFO videos released by the Pentagon, public fascination surged. John's site traffic exploded, with thousands flocking to explore the documents he had painstakingly collected. However, with increased attention came increased scrutiny. He noticed suspicious activity targeting his servers, DDoS attacks, phishing attempts, and even attempts to infiltrate his email. It was clear the Black Vault had become a beacon and a target. Allies or adversaries? Not all who approached John had pure intentions. Among the many who reached out were individuals claiming to represent government agencies, shadowy organizations, or private interests. Some sought to collaborate, others to manipulate. John learned to navigate these interactions carefully, using skepticism and verification to protect his integrity. The toll on personal life. The obsession with uncovering hidden truths came at a cost. John's relationships strained under the weight of secrecy and stress. Friends and family struggled to understand why he devoted so much time to documents and mysteries. At times, John questioned whether the quest was worth the sacrifice. But the unanswered questions, the elusive truths, kept pulling him deeper. A glimpse of the bigger picture, piecing together information from multiple sources, John began to see a pattern. A global network of secrecy involving governments, militaries, and shadow organizations. The UFO phenomenon was just one thread in a complex tapestry of hidden agendas. The Black Vault was a window into this shadow world, but the full view remained obscured. The deeper John Greenwald Jr. delved into the labyrinth of secrets, the more he realized that the story of UFOs was intertwined with something far darker and more complex than public speculation suggested. New revelations from the Vault one late evening, as rain tapped against the window of his small home office. John opened an unmarked envelope sent anonymously through the mail. Inside were hundreds of pages of documents, black and white photocopies, detailing an obscure project named Operation Seraphim. According to the papers, this project was an off-the-books collaboration between the military and a clandestine scientific group studying the psychological effects of alleged extraterrestrial encounters on both civilians and military personnel. John read with a growing unease. Experiments with sensory manipulation, memory alteration, and disinformation campaigns designed to keep the public confused and distracted. The mind games. One document outlined a series of memory augmentation trials, where subjects who claimed alien encounters were subjected to procedures intended to either reinforce or erase their memories. The goal was to control the narrative, shaping who would be believed and who would be dismissed as delusional. John's heart pounded as he scanned reports of patients waking up with fragmented memories, nightmares, and an overwhelming sense of paranoia. He began to understand why so many witnesses recanted or went silent. Their minds were being tampered with. The hidden war. A new set of files pointed to a covert conflict not fought with guns or bombs, but with technology and information. Termed the Shadow War, it described efforts by various factions, government agencies, private corporations, and secret societies, vying for control of alien-derived technology. These battles were waged in boardrooms, labs, and cyberspace, with little regard for the lives affected. John realized that his quest for truth had thrust him into the middle of this invisible war. Encounters that changed everything. Among the documents were personal testimonies from insiders, agents and scientists who had witnessed the inexplicable firsthand. One such account was from a physicist who claimed to have seen an otherworldly craft inside a government hangar, its surface shimmering with colors beyond human perception. He described strange symbols etched into the metal and a hum that resonated deep within his bones. But the most unsettling part was the presence of shadowy figures guarding the site. Not just security personnel, but something else, something inhuman, the price of exposure. As John prepared to publish a new batch of files, his website was hit by a sophisticated cyber attack, knocking it offline for days. Emails warning him to stop flooded in. He received cryptic phone calls with nothing but heavy breathing on the other end. John knew the closer he got, the more dangerous it became. Yet, retreat was not an option. A strange ally. In the midst of this turmoil, John received a message from a mysterious woman named Mara. She claimed to be a former intelligence analyst, disillusioned with the lies she had been told. Mara offered help, access to classified information and protection. Their meetings were tense and cautious, conducted in encrypted channels and secluded locations. She warned John that the line between friend and foe was blurred, and trust was a rare commodity. The global puzzle piecing together. Information from Mara and his own research, John began mapping connections between UFO sightings, secret experiments, and geopolitical tensions. From remote deserts to dense forests, from Arctic bases to underground bunkers, the puzzle spanned continents and decades. He saw patterns of cover-ups timed with political events, and signs that the truth was being manipulated to serve agendas far beyond public understanding. The question of disclosure. John grappled with the idea of full disclosure. Would the world be ready for the truth? Or was secrecy necessary to prevent panic, chaos, or worse? The line between protecting the public and controlling them blurred. The burden of knowledge. As the weight of these revelations settled on him, John felt the isolation grow. Friends distanced themselves, unsure how to process the shadowy world he described. But the drive to expose the truth, to honor those silenced or forgotten, pushed him forward. The underground network. After months of tireless digging, John Greenwald Jr. uncovered whispers of an underground network, a loose coalition of insiders, whistleblowers, and truth seekers scattered across the globe. They called themselves the Keepers. The Keepers operated in the shadows, exchanging secrets via encrypted messages, meeting only in secure, anonymous locations. Their mission was to preserve classified knowledge, expose corruption, and protect humanity from manipulation. John's contact, Mara, invited him to a clandestine meeting deep beneath an unassuming warehouse in Washington, D.C. A meeting in the dark. The cavernous basement was dimly lit, the air heavy with anticipation. John's footsteps echoed as he followed Mara through a maze of corridors. He wasn't alone. Around a large table sat men and women whose faces bore the weariness of secrets carried too long. Some had been government agents. Others were scientists or journalists who had lost everything in their quest for truth. They shared stories, accounts of disappearances, shadowy agencies, and disturbing experiments. John realized the UFO phenomenon was a symptom of something larger, a system of control and deception. Project Nebula. The Keepers revealed classified details of Project Nebula, an initiative to monitor, manipulate, and if necessary, neutralize extraterrestrial technology and information that threatened the established order. Nebula operatives embedded themselves in scientific institutions, media outlets, and government agencies, carefully steering public perception. John's own investigation had attracted attention from Nebula operatives, explaining the cyber attacks and intimidation he had faced. Inside the Black Vault, John was granted unprecedented access to a hidden vault, an archive of declassified files, recovered artifacts, and cryptic correspondence related to UFO investigations dating back decades. Among the files, he found startling evidence of back-engineered technology, unexplained physical phenomena, and the existence of non-human intelligences interacting with human governments. Each file deepened the mystery, revealing layers of truth obscured by layers of lies. The cost of truth. The more John learned, the heavier the burden became. Personal threats escalated. His home was broken into, digital footprints erased, and surveillance became overt. He questioned whether the pursuit of truth was worth the personal cost, but the voices of the silenced urged him onward. The enigma of contact. One dossier contained chilling testimonies from alleged contactees, people who claimed ongoing communication with extraterrestrial entities. Some described encounters filled with warnings about humanity's future. Others spoke of technology that could save or destroy civilization. The accounts were fragmented and often dismissed as delusions, but the consistency across stories suggested something real and urgent. Echoes of the past. The Keepers introduced John to archival footage from forgotten UFO cases. One in particular stood out: a 1967 incident involving a crashed craft in the Nevada desert and a recovered being, neither human nor machine. The footage was grainy but undeniable. It showed government personnel hurriedly covering up the site, and a brief glimpse of a strange, luminescent figure. John felt a chill as he watched, realizing history was not what it seemed. The Web Titan's news outlets started picking up on leaks from anonymous sources. Pressure mounted on the government to acknowledge UFO phenomena. John was approached by officials offering deals, access in exchange for silence. He declined, knowing the truth demanded no price. A flicker of hope. Despite threats, cyber attacks, and isolation, the Keeper's network grew stronger. Citizen scientists, independent journalists, and activists rallied to demand transparency. John found renewed resolve in their determination, believing that the tide was turning. The unseen enemy. Yet, lurking beneath the surface, a darker force moved. Not all factions within the government wanted disclosure. Some saw extraterrestrial technology as a means to power, an opportunity to control economies, militaries, and societies. The battle for truth was as much a battle for humanity's soul. The final push. As momentum for disclosure grew, John and the Keepers prepared for their most daring move yet. A coordinated release of documents, footage, and testimonies that could no longer be ignored or suppressed. Leaked emails, whistleblower accounts, and corroborating evidence would be made public simultaneously across multiple platforms, ensuring maximum impact. John knew this was a point of no return. Shadows close. In days before the release, the pressure intensified. John's communications were intercepted, his movements tracked, and covert threats became brazen warnings. Yet, allies within government agencies provided subtle support, encrypted messages hinting at factions favoring truth over cover-up. The world seemed poised on the edge of revelation or ruin. The disclosure event. When the files went live, reactions were swift and polarized. Skeptics dismissed the leaks as elaborate hoaxes. Conspiracy theorists celebrated their vindication. Governments issued statements assuring the public they were investigating. Media outlets struggled to balance sensationalism and responsibility. The aftermath for John. The release was bittersweet. Some doors opened, interviews, invitations to panels, and recognition among researchers. Others slammed shut. Legal threats, targeted misinformation campaigns, and isolation from former contacts. He realized the war for truth was ongoing and complex. Echoes across the world. Across the globe, similar leaks emerged. Fragments of truth from different governments and secret programs. Public interest surged, prompting demands for transparency, reforms, and ethical oversight. The veil had been pierced, but the full picture remained elusive. The new frontier. John and the Keepers shifted focus to education and advocacy. They worked to empower citizens to question narratives, analyze evidence critically, and demand accountability. The truth was no longer just hidden files. It was a movement. Reflections. Looking back, John understood that the journey was as important as the destination. The Black Vault was more than a collection of documents. It was a symbol of resistance against secrecy and manipulation. Though shadows lingered, the light of curiosity and courage burned brighter. The legacy. As the story closes, John leaves the door open for what comes next. The universe remains vast and mysterious, with many questions unanswered. But humanity's quest for understanding, sparked by those who dared to seek truth in the dark, continues. The evening was unusually still. In a quiet corner of upstate New York, where thick forests blanketed the hills and the roads curved gently like lazy rivers, a man named Simon Hale sat alone on his porch. His hands cradled a chipped mug of chamomile tea, still steaming in the cool September air. The last streaks of golden sun slipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across his yard. The quiet hum of cicadas began to rise, the kind of sound that seemed to stretch time itself. Simon had moved here 2 years ago, after retiring early from a job in city planning. He didn't talk much about what led him to leave the city so suddenly, but those close to him, what few friends he still kept in contact with, knew something had changed in him. He wasn't the same after that night. It began on a Monday, not an extraordinary day by any means. Simon had spent the morning repairing part of his garden fence and the afternoon sorting through old boxes in the attic. As evening fell, he remembered feeling a strange heaviness in the air, not oppressive, not threatening, just unfamiliar, like the world was holding its breath. That night, the stars were impossibly clear. Simon had always appreciated the night sky, but this time it felt different. He couldn't take his eyes off the patterns above him. They shimmered with a sharpness that almost hurt to look at. He sat in his usual chair on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, his eyes fixed upward, waiting for something he couldn't quite name. At exactly 11:23 p.m., he saw it. A light. Pale blue, flickering softly like the flame of a candle, hovering just above the tree line. It wasn't moving like a plane or a drone. It hovered for several minutes, then gently shifted, zigzagging with eerie precision, before disappearing completely. Simon blinked. He wasn't frightened, not yet. He simply stood, walked down from the porch, and followed the path into the woods behind his house. The same path he'd taken dozens of times before. Only now, the air felt electrically charged, as if a storm were about to break. Every sound, the rustling of leaves, the crack of twigs beneath his feet, felt exaggerated, louder than it should have been. He came to the clearing near the creek, the one with the old bench he'd built himself from pine and cedar. And there, in that quiet space where fireflies sometimes danced in summer, was something new. A shape. It hovered a few feet above the grass, metallic but organic. Smooth curves that shimmered even in the dark. No engines, no windows, no seams. Just a presence. And then time stopped. Not metaphorically, literally. The sound of the creek froze. The wind ceased. Even the faint buzzing of insects fell silent. Simon later described it as standing inside a photograph. He could move, but the world around him had paused, like a paused movie waiting for someone to press play again. Then a voice entered his mind, not through his ears, but directly into his thoughts. "You are safe, do not be afraid." It was soothing, clear, neither male nor female, a voice without accent or language yet perfectly understood. Simon stood motionless, heart pounding but somehow calm. He tried to speak, but no words came. The object pulsed faintly, almost as if breathing, and then, without a sound, it opened. Not with hinges, not like a door, more like space itself parted. Inside it was infinite. He later described it as stepping into a place without walls, without floor or ceiling. A realm of soft light, where geometric patterns moved like clouds, and a gentle hum filled the air. There was no weight, no pressure on his body, just the sensation of being held, observed, and curiously understood. Figures appeared, tall, robed in silver-gray fabric that shimmered like water. They had eyes, not eyes like humans, but eyes that saw through him. They weren't frightening. In fact, they radiated calm. One approached, holding out a hand, not to take him anywhere, but simply in greeting. Simon reached out. When their hands touched, a rush of memories that weren't his flooded his mind. Oceans on foreign worlds, civilizations that sang their history into the sky, vast ships that drifted silently between stars. He couldn't hold on to any of it. Each image slipped away like sand through fingers, but the feeling remained. Connection. They weren't here to harm. They were watching, studying, waiting. And he, for reasons he still doesn't understand, had been chosen to witness it. He remembers nothing after that. Just a moment of blinding light. And then waking up in bed, fully dressed, the blanket still wrapped around his shoulders. It was 4:08 a.m. The birds hadn't begun to sing yet. The stars were fading, and Simon's tea mug still sat on the porch railing, now stone cold. For days after, he tried to rationalize it. A vivid dream. sleepwalking, stress. But then he found something strange. A small silver coin-sized disc on his neck, beneath the skin. Not painful, not visible unless pressed. A faint warmth pulsed from it now and then. Medical scans showed nothing. Then came the dreams. Clearer than dreams should be. Places he didn't know but somehow recognized. Names in languages he didn't speak but somehow understood. And always the same feeling. You are part of something much larger than you think. He began writing it all down, first in a notebook, then on his computer. Pages and pages, symbols, thoughts, sketches of the beings he met, maps of star systems he swore he'd never seen before, but could draw from memory. Friends stopped calling. Some thought he'd lost his mind. But Simon didn't mind. He knew something real had happened. He'd been taken, but not abducted in the traditional sense. No, this was different. It was an invitation. And it wasn't over. Not yet. Because even now, years later, the lights still return. He no longer fears them. He waits. And he listens. Because once you've seen beyond the veil of the ordinary, you can never go back. And some nights, when the stars are just right, Simon Hale still walks to that old bench by the creek and watches the sky with soft, patient eyes, knowing they're watching too. A month passed. Simon Hale's life settled back into a gentle rhythm, but beneath the surface, everything had changed. He still made tea each evening, still swept the porch, fed the birds, and kept a modest vegetable garden. But now his days were quieter, not by circumstance, but by necessity. He spent his time listening, not to people. There were hardly any of those around anymore, but to the world itself. The trees, the wind, the soft hum of the earth at dusk. He felt it now beneath all things, like a low murmur from something ancient and unseen. And then, one morning, he heard the signal. It came through his old radio set, a dusty shortwave receiver he'd kept in his attic. He hadn't touched it in years, not since his amateur radio days back in college. But on that particular morning, drawn by something he couldn't quite explain, Simon dusted it off, plugged it in, and turned the dial slowly, listening to the static wash across frequencies like waves against a distant shore. Then it stopped. A tone, clear, bell-like, repeating every 4 seconds. Simon leaned in. The sound wasn't musical. It was mathematical. A sequence, maybe. Each chime subtly different in pitch. He scribbled the intervals down, plotting them on paper. A pattern emerged. He didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But he felt it in his bones. It was for him. The signal repeated nightly, always at the same hour, 2:17 a.m. Never early, never late. He began recording it, analyzing its pitch and spacing. He sent it to a friend from his university days, a retired astrophysicist named Claire, who now lived in Arizona. She responded 2 days later with a single message. "This isn't a radio signal, it's biological. It's you that's receiving it." Simon stared at the email, chilled. Biological. Claire called him later that evening, her voice uncharacteristically tight with concern. I ran tests on the waveform, Simon. It's not electromagnetic in origin, not in any conventional sense. It's resonant. The tones respond differently when near certain organic material. What kind? Yours. Only yours. They paused, letting the silence stretch. You're telling me I'm the antenna, Simon whispered. Or the instrument, she said. Maybe both. The dreams intensified after that. Not chaotic or frightening, but vivid and intricate. Worlds he had no words for. Time folding inward like origami. A sense of movement that wasn't travel, but alignment. Like tuning forks ringing in unison. In one dream, a being stood in front of him, one he recognized from the first encounter. Its face was blank, eyes luminous, its voice a soundless pressure in his mind. The lattice awakens, it said. Simon awoke breathless, drenched in sweat. He began keeping a nightly journal, not just of the dreams, but of every minute sensation. A breeze that felt too cold. The flicker of a light bulb that seemed to blink in rhythm with his pulse. Once, while washing dishes, he looked up and saw the sky split. Not physically, but perceptually, as if two versions of reality overlapped for a moment. He stood frozen for 10 minutes, gripping a plate, his reflection staring back at him through the kitchen window, doubled and blurred. Then it was gone. Later that week, a letter arrived. Not in the mailbox, but on his porch, folded under a smooth river stone. No postage, no handwriting, just a single sheet of paper with one typed sentence. You are being prepared. No signature, no markings. He didn't tell Claire. Not yet. Instead, Simon followed his instincts, returning to the clearing by the creek each night, notebook in hand, waiting, watching, listening. The signal changed on the 12th night. The tone grew deeper, layered. He noticed small flashes of light at the edge of the woods, like static in the corner of his vision. He couldn't be sure they were real. Then came the animals. Not many, just one or two at a time. A fox here, an owl. Once, a large stag stepped into the clearing and stood silently, staring at him with knowing eyes. They didn't flee. They lingered, as if called, as if they, too, were receiving the signal. That's when Simon began to write. Not with intention. He simply couldn't stop. Pages and pages of symbols, spirals, intersecting shapes that looked like blueprints for things not yet invented. He didn't understand them consciously, but his hand moved with purpose. When he looked back over the drawings, a kind of language emerged. Not words, but feelings. Messages encoded in geometry. Instructions written in the grammar of the universe. Claire visited the following week. She arrived in a rental car, her long silver hair pulled into a braid, eyes narrowed with curiosity and worry. You look like you haven't slept in days, she said. I haven't needed to, Simon replied. She examined the markings on his neck, the spot where the disc still pulsed faintly beneath his skin. She brought equipment, scanners, meters, even a Faraday cage setup she assembled in his living room. Inside it, the signal vanished. But the moment he stepped out, it returned, stronger than before. Claire stayed for 3 days. During that time, she witnessed the tone herself, recorded it, analyzed it, watched it shift when Simon merely walked into the room. "This isn't a transmission," she whispered late one night. "It's communication, two-way. You're responding to it. You're part of the system now." Simon nodded, calm. "I know." Claire left on the 4th morning, shaken but intrigued. She promised to stay in touch, to dig deeper. She told Simon to be careful. But Simon wasn't afraid. He felt clearer than he ever had in his life. Because something had changed in him. Not just his body, not just his mind, but the way he fit into the world. The way he heard time. The way he sensed patterns in things once thought random. The clearing behind his house had become sacred, a kind of threshold. And on the 33rd night since the encounter, the threshold opened again. A hum, low and melodic, filled the air. The trees bent inward as if bowing. Above the grass, the air shimmered, folding into itself until the same shape appeared, a vessel of soft light and perfect silence. Simon stepped forward. This time he wasn't alone. 3 others emerged from the woods. 2 men, 1 woman. Strangers. Ordinary on the surface, but each drawn by dreams, by strange signals, by a knowing that defied logic. They looked at Simon with eyes wide in wonder. "You heard it too," he said gently. They nodded. The vessel opened, not with urgency, not with force, but with welcome, and the 4 of them stepped inside. This time, Simon didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt home. Inside the vessel, there was no floor, no ceiling, no clear distinction between walls and air, only an expanse of soft silver light that seemed to hold the shape of a room without containing it. The air was neither warm nor cold, and the gravity felt optional. Simon floated without floating, walked without touching the ground. The others stood nearby, the 3 strangers who had joined him in the clearing. A woman in her late 30s with eyes the color of distant thunderclouds. A young man, maybe 22, visibly trembling, but wide-eyed with awe. And an older man in a weathered denim jacket, who looked as though he'd seen this coming all his life. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. A low pulse echoed gently throughout the chamber. Not sound, exactly, but something deeper, felt in the spine and ribs. It resonated in rhythm with Simon's heartbeat, as if syncing with him. Then a presence entered the room. Not through a doorway, because there were none. It simply appeared. Tall, luminous, slightly indistinct around the edges, like light seen through fog. No eyes or mouth, no discernible face, but somehow expression was conveyed, not with features, but with intent. The being regarded each of them in turn. When it turned to Simon, he felt the words form, not heard, but delivered directly into his thoughts, as though someone had dropped meaning like a stone into a still pond. We are not here to lead. We are here because you listened. Simon breathed slowly, allowing the message to settle. The chamber shifted. Again, not visually, but dimensionally. Space unfolded outward, revealing threads of glowing light stretched across a vast tapestry, like constellations made of memory and signal. You have begun to hear the lattice, the being continued. You have begun to remember. The others stepped forward instinctively. The woman looked up and whispered, "Why us?" "Because your resonance is right. You are attuned." Then, as gently as a falling feather, the chamber dissolved into stars. Simon was no longer standing on anything. He floated in an endless expanse surrounded by shifting shapes and structures that defied geometry. Time had no hold here. Thought shaped the world. He saw the past, not as events, but as harmonics. Sound and light entwined. Human history unfolded as notes in a grand composition. Wars, births, discoveries, all just waves in a universal melody. He saw himself, not just as Simon Hale, but as something older. A pattern that had echoed across generations. He saw himself as a child, hearing static in the wind. As a teenager staring into the night sky, inexplicably certain that something out there already knew him. Then came the places, not physical locations, but realms within the lattice. Thought cities of crystalline logic, rivers of data that sang as they flowed, sentient clouds that dreamed entire civilizations into existence. The universe is not built from matter, Simon. It is built from recognition. He felt himself nod. Back in the chamber, if it could be called that, he returned to the moment, grounded now with deeper understanding. The young man beside him whispered, "Is this real?" Simon turned to him and smiled. "Does it matter?" There was a pause. Then the being spoke again. "You carry within you the seed of remembrance. The earth has forgotten its part in the harmony. But some of you are beginning to hum again." The chamber shifted once more. Now they stood, somehow, beneath a sky of living ink, stars like neurons flickering across the surface of a great mind. A memory flooded Simon's senses, not his, but the planet's. Mountains being born, oceans learning to breathe, creatures rising and fading, each adding their verse to the song. And then a dissonance, a fracture in the harmony. Not evil, not malicious, but a blindness born of separation. Your species stepped outside the song. You thought silence meant power. You confused solitude for sovereignty. Simon closed his eyes. He could feel it now, that ache in the human frequency, the loneliness, the scramble for control, the desperate hunger to name everything and yet understand so little. "We did not come to fix," the voice said. "We came to remind." And so they showed him more. Visions unfolded like petals. civilizations on distant worlds, each with their own frequencies. Some had reached dissonance and found their way back. Others had faded into the void, unresolved chords echoing into silence. But Earth was on the cusp, a planet of staggering potential, a species awakening from amnesia. The lattice quivered with possibility. Simon felt something inside him respond, not fear, but responsibility, a quiet resolve. The others seemed to feel it too. They exchanged glances, not needing words. They were chosen not to obey, but to remember, not to worship, but to tune. Then the being stepped forward again, closer now, its outline shimmering with thousands of tiny points of light, like galaxies condensed into form. This is not the end of your journey. It is the return to the beginning. The light around them swirled, lifting them in spirals of color and tone. No longer a vessel, but a chord, sung into existence, carrying them through layers of perception. They awoke in the clearing. No time had passed, and yet everything had changed. The grass was damp with dew. The early morning light filtered through the trees. Birds called gently from the branches, as though greeting old friends. Simon sat up slowly. So did the others. No one spoke right away. They simply breathed, eyes wide, grounded and dazed. The bond between them was unbreakable now. They were not strangers anymore. They were resonance, part of a greater pattern. The woman, whose name Simon now remembered was Mara, smiled softly. "I dreamed of the sea," she said, "but the water sang." The young man, Ben, nodded. "I saw my grandfather, but younger. He told me the stars were doors." The older man, whom they learned was called Elias, simply said, "I remember now. I've seen them before. In the desert. In 77, I just didn't know how to listen." Simon didn't share what he saw. Not yet. Because what he had seen was still unfolding. Simon had always thought of memory as something stored in the brain, like books on a shelf. But now, walking through his quiet home in the days that followed, he realized memory wasn't kept. It was shared, between people, between places, even between the stars. He would pause in a doorway and feel a pull behind the drywall. He would run his fingers across the kitchen counter and catch a whisper, not in words, but in knowing. Something was vibrating beneath the surface of everything. He began hearing the tones again, low and round like a singing bowl, soft but resonant. He could tell they came from nowhere and everywhere at once. They arrived when he was relaxed, drinking tea, staring at the leaves trembling in the backyard breeze, or watching headlights smear across the ceiling at night. And then there were the dreams. Each night, he was somewhere else. Sometimes on Earth, sometimes not. Sometimes in his own body, sometimes in another's, but always witnessing something that connected the song, that great hidden hum that had cradled the world long before people tried to measure it. One dream stood out. He stood in a library with no end. Bookshelves curled like galaxies, staircases looped into Mobius strips. In the center of the space was a globe, not of Earth, but of many Earths. layers of reality stacked like onion skin paper. Each rotation brought another version of humanity into view, some peaceful, some post-collapse, some half-merged with light. A voice accompanied the vision, one he knew from the vessel. Memory is the medium, awareness is the brush. When Simon woke, the message was clear. He had been given access to something ancient, and it had nothing to do with technology, or even with aliens as the world understood them. It had to do with resonance, with retuning the Earth's memory field. He wasn't alone. The others had begun to experience their own awakening. They stayed in contact now, sometimes over the phone, sometimes in person. Mara began painting. Abstracts at first, but soon full landscapes and maps she claimed she didn't understand. One looked like a spiral canyon carved into the side of a red mountain. Another was a field of white towers glowing beneath aurora-colored skies. Ben began playing music again, after years of silence. At first, it was simple melodies on his childhood piano. But then, new sounds crept in. Notes that didn't follow scales. Harmonies that rang in the bones more than in the ears. Elias, quiet and steady, kept journals. He filled them with diagrams, ancient glyphs, and coordinates he couldn't trace on any map. Sometimes he'd speak of the Watchers in the Iron Wind, as though remembering something from long ago. One day, the group met at Simon's home. They sat in the garden, the air heavy with the warmth of late afternoon. Cicadas hummed lazily in the trees. A stillness fell over them. Simon pulled out the sketch he'd made, a grid of overlapping circles, each connected by lines that seemed to hum off the page. "This came to me yesterday," he said. "It's not a drawing. I think it's a route, a way through the lattice." Ben nodded. Like a musical score, but spatial. Mara traced one of the lines with her finger. These places aren't locations. They're events, moments that harmonize. Elias lit a match and stared into its flame. And they're beginning again. Simon frowned. "What is?" "The openings," Elias said softly. "The sky windows. Portals, if you want to call them that. But they're more like breaches in forgetting." The group was silent for a while. Then Mara stood. She pulled a pendant from around her neck, an old brass compass that no longer spun. She'd worn it since their first encounter. "Yesterday," she said, "the needle moved." Simon stared at it. The compass now pointed directly northeast. "What's there?" Ben asked. Mara exhaled slowly. "No idea, but I think we're supposed to find out." They left at dawn, not in haste but in rhythm, as if the world itself had agreed it was time. Their journey took them across forested hills and long, empty highways. The compass led the way. At times, the group fell into silence, not out of awkwardness, but because language felt too small. Somewhere near the Canadian border, they came upon the place. It was not marked on any map. A field of tall grass opened before them, surrounded by a sparse ring of birch trees. The compass needle quivered with intensity. They stepped into the clearing, and the hum returned. It rose slowly, like a cello bow across a silver string. The air grew denser, richer, not heavy, just aware. They could feel it in their teeth, behind their eyes, inside their blood. Then the ground pulsed. Once, twice, and then it parted, like mist in reverse. In its place appeared a structure, not metallic, not stone, more like a memory of architecture, something woven from light and pressure, visible only when you stopped trying to see it. Simon stepped forward. The moment he crossed the threshold, time let go. Inside, the air was fluid. Gravity followed intention. The space was larger than the exterior allowed. A spiral corridor led downward, etched with symbols that looked like calligraphy written by weather. In the heart of the structure, they found the table, round, smooth. Its surface shimmered with a kind of pre-language, a communication that bypassed thought and entered directly into experience. When Simon touched it, he fell inward, not into a void, but into a tapestry. He saw Earth from above, its frequencies painted in colors he had no names for. He saw spikes in the energy field, Roswell, Rendlesham, Phoenix, and others unrecorded. Each spike wasn't just an event, it was a song fragment, a verse of the forgotten harmony. And then he saw the others, not aliens as stories had described them, but caretakers of pattern, custodians of coherence. They didn't invade, they remembered. They waited for the right resonance to emerge. Each contact is a chord, the voice returned, some dissonant, some resolving. Simon opened his eyes. Mara, Ben, and Elias were also at the table. Their faces reflected quiet awe. "We're not here to witness," Elias whispered. "We're here to tune." Simon nodded slowly. He finally understood. The stories people told about abductions, about lights in the sky, lost time, strange marks, they weren't just anomalies. They were interruptions in the collective forgetting, invitations to remember, to realign. And this place, Titsung, it was a key. Not a base, not a lab, but a tuning fork, a harmonic anchor. One of many scattered across the globe, hidden in plain sight, revealed only when the melody was right. Simon placed his palm on the table again. "It's time," the voice said. "The lattice is waking." And with that, the chamber dissolved into the next note of the great unfolding. They did not return the way they came, not because the path had changed, but because they had. Leaving the structure was like rising from a dream, not a nightmare, not even a lucid vision, but a place older than sleep itself. They stepped once more onto the soft grass of the clearing, the sunlight dappling through the birch canopy above. The field looked the same, but the air no longer did. Everything shimmered faintly, as though the world had inhaled and was holding its breath. The birds did not sing. The breeze did not rustle. It was the stillness before a song begins, when the silence knows. Elias stood with his eyes closed, head tilted. "I can hear it," he said. "It's slower now, broader." Simon knew what he meant. The hum hadn't vanished. It had spread. It no longer sounded like something inside his ears. It was in the stones, the leaves, the clouds. Everything was vibrating at the same gentle, impossible pitch. And with it came something else. Recognition. The others had felt it too. They didn't speak much on the drive back. Instead, they allowed the stillness to carry them, their minds opening to a deep inner architecture that had only just begun to unfold. They had touched something vast, and now it was touching back. Back in town, life continued as if nothing had shifted. Children laughed in parks. Streetlights blinked in rhythm. The mail arrived on schedule. But to Simon, the world now held echoes. Ordinary objects seemed to hum when he neared them, especially those made by hand, especially those passed through generations. A carved wooden bowl, a blanket his grandmother had stitched, a quartz stone someone had given him as a child. All of them now shimmered with memory. Not personal memory, but field memory. As though the earth had begun to speak through what had always been here. Mara began seeing patterns, in clouds, in moss, in sidewalk cracks. Not random, but rhythmic, like language repeating across dimensions, waiting to be noticed. Ben started drawing sound, not music notation, but glyphs that came to him after dreams. He said the drawings had weight, that they carried the feeling of both architecture and melody. Elias, always the observer, began to collect soil samples. He claimed he could hear tones in the dirt. Different soil, he said, sings different notes, and some harmonize with each other. They met weekly now, not to decode, not to analyze, just to share, and to sit in silence together when needed. Each gathering felt like tuning an invisible string. There was no leader, no destination, only a knowing that they were inside something awakening. Simon often sat by his window at night, listening. The sky had changed, not visibly, but sonically. He could feel new arrangements in the stars, a soft architecture overhead, and sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he'd see symbols drawn in light, simple shapes, circles, triangles, spirals, that somehow conveyed entire truths without needing translation. One evening, as dusk pooled across the landscape, the tone in his ear returned. Not a hum this time, a phrase. Prepare the anchor. The lattice stirs. Simon didn't panic, didn't even question. He only breathed slowly and replied softly, "How?" By remembering. The wind moved through the trees like a sigh. That night, he dreamed again. He was floating above a landscape that didn't exist on any map, vast and crystalline, with rivers of glass winding through hills that shimmered like pearls. In the dream, he hovered above a massive stone disk embedded in the earth. At the disk's center, 4 figures standing at its cardinal points. They were not human, but they were not strangers either. Their presence was gentle, reverent. They faced outward, arms lifted, palms open to the sky. Light flowed from them, not from their hands, but through them, as if they were vessels in a vast circuit. The disk beneath them pulsed with soft colors. each ripple moving outward like a bell ringing in slow motion. Above them, in the clouds, a shape formed, a spiral, a helix, a map of the lattice. Simon awoke just before the dream turned. He drew what he could remember, a disk, 4 figures, radiating lines, and in the center, an eye. Not literal, but a symbol of perception, of witnessing. When he showed it to the others at their next meeting, Elias went pale. "I've seen this," he said, "in my journals, weeks ago, before any of us went to the clearing." Mara pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket. It was a painting of the same scene. Different colors, different style, but unmistakably the same image. Ben retrieved one of his sound glyph drawings. On the reverse side, absent-mindedly scribbled, was the spiral and the 4-point circle. They stared at one another. It wasn't just dreams. It was convergence. The following days brought a strange calm, as though the earth itself had accepted the next measure in the composition. There were no ships in the sky, no flashing lights, no government cover-ups or unexplainable radar returns. Only knowing. It was enough. And then another ripple, as Simon received a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single page, cream-colored, textured like parchment. On it, "We are listening. The lattice remembers you. Continue." That night, he dreamed again. But this time he wasn't alone. The group was there, standing in the middle of the circle from his previous vision. Around them, light beings, not quite formed, not quite formless, watched silently. The circle began to pulse. Beneath their feet, the geometry lit up. And then they heard it. Not a hum, not a voice, a chord, massive, warm, alive, a harmony that existed in and around them. They weren't being taught, they were being invited. When Simon awoke, he felt lighter than air. By week's end, the lattice began to respond. People in their town, quiet, ordinary people, began reporting dreams of symbols, of floating cities, of lost time regained. Birds migrated off course to hover in specific patterns over open fields. Children drew circles and stars and handed them to their parents, saying, "It's the sound that makes everything." A local radio station broadcast static for 3 minutes and 21 seconds. No one knew why. But during those minutes, listeners across the region claimed they felt a peace so deep it brought them to tears. Simon didn't need proof. He only needed quiet. Because in that quiet, the world had begun to sing, and they were finally learning to listen. There was no finale, no blinding light, no climactic confrontation, no voice declaring, "You are chosen." Just a gentle unfolding, like mist rolling off a morning field, like a clock you never realized had started ticking, finally reaching the hour you didn't know would matter. Simon sat by the river, the same river he had fished as a boy, the same one he had walked beside, thinking about college, then jobs, then the shape of a life. It looked unchanged, but he no longer did. Not in ways a mirror would show, but in ways water might remember. The others had also grown quieter, not in the sense of retreating, but expanding. Mara no longer painted for galleries. She painted in silence, on stone, on tree bark, on driftwood she found, washed up on the shores of places she'd never noticed before. Symbols flowed from her brush, like they had always existed. Elias spent entire afternoons listening to wind in the grass. He would sit with his back straight, eyes half closed, and hum softly. Not songs, not melodies, but notes that matched the rustling of trees, the flight of birds overhead, even the distant hum of unseen satellites. Ben had begun walking farther and farther into the wilderness. He mapped nothing, brought no compass. He simply followed feelings, the soft pull behind the eyes, the knowing beneath the ribs. Wherever he stopped, he drew spirals in the soil humming beneath his breath. They did not meet as often anymore, but they were more connected than ever. When one of them dreamed, the others would feel a warmth behind their eyes, a whisper in the early morning, a nudge in the pattern of light through their windows. They called it the echo, and it meant the lattice was singing again. One quiet afternoon, Simon returned to the clearing, alone. He didn't expect to find the structure. It was gone. Of course it was. But the field knew. The grass swayed in slow, harmonious ripples. Birdsong moved in paired tones, intervals soft and resonant. Clouds drifted in elliptical shapes that somehow felt like punctuation. He walked to the center of where it once stood and sat. Not to meditate, not to seek answers, but to listen. Because listening was enough now. In the silence, the memory of the lattice stirred, not as a thing above or beyond or hidden, but as something within. It had never come from the stars. It had never needed ships or suits or lights in the sky. It had simply waited for them to remember, to open, to feel. And now, it was waking again, not through events, but through attention. Not through invasions, but through invitation. That night, Simon dreamed one final time. He was standing not in a field, not on earth, but in a space between. There was no sky, no ground, only light, gentle and vast. Figures moved within it, not human, not alien, but familiar. They were made of the same light he was, and they sang. Each vibration a memory, each tone a teaching, each pause an embrace. And when Simon looked down, he saw that he too had become translucent, not vanished, but transparent to the current. He could feel the entire group, Mara, Elias, Ben, beside him, even though no faces remained. They stood in the lattice, not beneath it, not outside it, as part of it. A hum passed through them, and the words were not words. We are you remembering yourself. We are not the watchers. We are not the abductors. We are the mirror held still long enough for you to see. And then the lattice folded. not vanished, folded into the body, into breath, into thought, into sleep. Simon awoke in his bed. The dawn light was pale. A single bird chirped by the window. The clock ticked normally, but the hum was still there. He smiled, because the story never ended. It only moved quieter, deeper, slower, like a melody threading through lives, calling gently, reminding them that contact was never about being taken. It was always about being returned.